In this video, we are doing something really quite special. It is solid axle versus an independent front suspension. We are going to be using the Element Ecto and testing this out. Welcome everyone, my name is Troy, this is Roadside RC. On the channel you'll see everything from crawling, bashing, drifting, racing, all that kind of stuff. Plus product review videos and how-tos, and that's exactly what we have going on here today. Look at this, the independent front suspension kit from Element RC bolts directly onto the majority of their vehicles. We are going to give it a test today on the Element Ecto. Now, when I first did the unboxing of Element Ecto, lots and lots of opinions out there around the independent front suspension. Is it good? Is it bad? Literally everything from people saying, hey, they really liked it, you know, added scale dimensions and stuff like that to their crawler and they thought it did well, to people that seem to just downright almost hate it, you know, with very, very passionate around it. So I'm just going to test it. You know, I got a lot of feedback from then, a lot of ideas of what people think happens, independent front suspension versus solid axle. So we're just going to test it. I'm going to go out to the crawler course first, do a couple obstacles with the truck solid axle, come back in, do some measurements, do some testing here on the workbench, swap over the independent front suspension, do it all over again. So let's get it started. rather cool. I mean, the truck still does very, very well. Honestly, I'm really, really happy with this truck. As we come into this, it's not 100% stock anymore. I have done the 12% overdrive to the front. I've lowered it as much as you can do with the suspension all around. I've actually swapped where the ESC, moved the receiver up here and swapped the ESC and battery location, as you can see here, just cutting up the factory battery box to make that work. And I've put a Zuske 35 kg servo in it. But other than that, this truck is exactly as it comes out of the box. Nothing has been changed from suspension geometry. We've got the new tires and wheels on it, of course, but other than that, literally as it comes out of the box. And so we're going to do a couple measurements here and test a few things on it before we dive into the independent front suspension kit. First thing we're going to do is check to see, is the independent front suspension going to actually add any weight to the total vehicle. No body, no battery. We are at 2,128 grams. Test number 2 is it going to impact the flex of the truck at all? So we're going to leave it again, no body, no battery. I'm going to pull up on this until that rear tire just starts to come off the ground, keeping the other front tire down. Okay, it's right about there, and I'm going to measure that to the outside of this lug. The third test here is all going to be about the turning angle. I want to make sure that what we do, I love the turning angle that we get on this truck. I want to make sure that we do not hinder it. So what I'm going to do is I'm lining up both tires with a straight edge here. I am then going to set a square right inside of it, and at the edge of it, center line is right here on this edge. We can then turn the wheel, and I can use one more straight edge along the edge of that wheel to see that we are actually dead on, somewhere plus or minus 45 degrees. The next couple tests I think are very interesting. These are actually reader or viewer submitted items. One of the things that they said is that when you pick up on one wheel with a solid axle truck, they believe it keeps more weight on the down wheel than it will with independent front suspension. So we're going to test it. So have it set on the scale 0 or very close to 0. And what I'm going to do is over here on this side, I'm going to start picking up on this wheel, and we're going to see, does it actually have more weight on it or less weight on it as we do this. Okay, so in order to do this again and try to do it as repeatedly as possible, I'm going to actually set the other tire on the duct tape. And on duct tape, we went to negative 116 grams. All right, the other concept that you see Element RC showing all the time is that even under a flex, because the wheels are independent, they don't actually angle. They can actually keep straight up and down. So again, we're going to try the same thing. Got the camera way down here on the ground. As we flex, we're looking at, you know, how much of that tire is left. We're going to go all the way to the point where the rear tire starts to come off the ground. It's right about there, all right? So you can see how much of the tire is not on the ground at this point. All right, lastly, and this may be one of the most important ones, we're gonna come in here and we're gonna measure how much distance clearance we actually have underneath this pumpkin. And as I set this here and I try to eyeball right under that pumpkin, I get to about 32 millimeters, something like that. Let's see if I can move it a little bit more forward. And what do we get to? Yep, right around 30. So 32 millimeters. And we are officially done with the conversion. Check it out. There are some things I want to point out around the instructions and the assembly process. The first thing, these, as you may expect, are actually to scale, so that is very helpful. When you get down to step 3, gate 3 as they call it, they tell you to go ahead and put the servo horn on, but very critically, they don't tell you actually which way to orient the servo or exactly where to put the horn in. And I had the whole thing out over here, didn't even have it anywhere near the truck, anywhere near powered on, anything like that. And so that was all kind of questionable to me, but it's very, very important. Okay, so then in this piece over here, gate 6, you're using bag 4, you're putting on these upper control arms with a pin, and you got to hold a pin in with a capture it with a screw. It is a 1mm hex screw, which fortunately I happen to have a wrench on me, but I typically don't when we're out on the field. So if it ever comes apart, I'm going to be very, very sad. Out there. This step, you have to have the servo and everything aligned before you start putting all these pieces in, because once this bottom access piece is installed, you can no longer access the servo screw or anything like that. As we get over here on this side, it shows I don't know if you can really see it in the camera or not, it has a little metal bracket that is supposed to mount to the shock tower and lower the upper shock mounting position. But this is actually for some standard shock towers with only 2-hole side, which is not what the Ecto has, which means this piece doesn't really fit. And if you try to put the shock on to the regular shock tower for the Ecto, it actually, even in the lowest position, holds the suspension up too high. So you have to make this work. But right now I only have it in with 1 screw. You can see it here. I have it in the lowest position possible, but I only have it in with 1 screw because the other screw doesn't really have anywhere to go, which means this is really not right. And if you're going to use this with an Ecto, you technically need to get different shock towers. Alright, now first test that we're doing with the truck is what is the total weight. Have we changed the total weight since we started? Gotta get it balanced on here. We're off. So 2148. So compared to previous, we gained 20 grams of weight all in this front area. So I'm not super sad because it is all up in the front at least, so that's a good thing. Is it distributed exactly where we want? It's probably, a lot of it's above the center axle of the wheel, so it's probably not exactly where we want it, but we can probably make do with it. All right, next thing we're gonna test is we're gonna test the flex of the truck. So again, we're gonna pick up this corner, and we're gonna see when that back tire starts to come off. Oh my, we're only at, let me try that again, make sure. Is that real? That is about 90 millimeters. 90 millimeters is 40 millimeters less than when it was from the... Next up is the steering angle, doing it just like we did before. We're gonna turn. We're gonna try this, and we are basically right at the 45-degree again. So nothing really changed as far as steering geometry that way goes. We can still get just as much turning angle. All right, so next we're gonna do the weight on one wheel test. So remember again, the theory is that it'll pull this wheel up earlier. So we're gonna take it and we're gonna set this on just like we did before. And it has negative 514 grams. So yes, that does mean, compared to what we were before, that it is actually, well, yep, that it is actually pulling that wheel up more. But that's really all what we're doing here, is really just testing the flexibility. And since we've already proved that the flex is less with it, that makes sense. And is what is the clearance that we get underneath here, and we're actually looking like we're at about 34 millimeters, 35 millimeters. So as it sits with how I had it set up, it actually does sit slightly higher right in the center. Now I didn't test with the stock one, but over here we're sitting at about 24. So we go from about 34 to 24, lose a little bit right here. The last thing that we're going to test is we're going to flex this tire up, and we're going to see, does this other tire stay flat? And it doesn't really. So even as we flex this up, this tire does still rock over some. Now maybe it's not as bad as it was with the Maybe it's not as bad as it was with the solid axle, but man, it definitely still does. It still rocks it over. You can see here the flex in that solid axle, how the right front's compressed more than the left. Maybe keeps that tire just slightly flatter on the ground as it goes over things compared to the solid axle. Test run complete. I don't know. Like, honestly, the truck is so capable anyway that it really does rather well. I think if you're really going on some rather smooth terrain, depending on what style of comp crawling you do, it could still work. I think really for me, the end result of this whole thing comes down into this, and I really hope you can see this on the screen. But that was literally a 5-minute test session, and look at how torn up these control arms are, this front skid plate. Look at this control arm. They took a lot of beating. The amount of times in which I was sliding on one of these control arms or just plain hitting the front here really surprised me, because, you know, we saw that we gained a couple millimeters of clearance compared to the solid axle here, but man, out there on the trail, it really does not work out that way. You do give up clearance here. Now, in all fairness, I was able to make it over the last obstacle that I was not able to make it over with the solid axle. So maybe there is some slight improvement there. I think that there's potential with the independent front suspension setup. I really, really do. I think that there's opportunity to keep the tires more planted, especially when you have one tire under load and you're curved over. I really do believe that the other tire still does have more total tire on the ground, right? The other corner does. So I think that there's potential here. I really, really wanted this to be good. I really wanted it to be better. I just don't think it is. I think this specific design, it just allows for too many hang-ups down here on the front. And then specifically with this Ecto, because of how it restricts where and how you put the front bumper in the beginning of the front of the truck here, that's just really the other nail in the coffin for me. So the fact that we're catching these control arms all the time, and then the fact that, you know, this whole front bumper situation needs to be rearranged. My battery can't be as clean because of how I moved my receiver in ESC as much. Like, because of all of that, it really, I think I'm gonna go back. I think I'm gonna spend the time tonight converting this all the way back to where it was before. So my personal take, independent front suspension versus solid axle on the Element Ecto with this Element independent front suspension setup is a no-go. It's solid axle. It's pretty easy. So I spent $100 to try and prove this and test this. I hope you find it valuable, because that might now be $100 that you don't have to spend. So wish I could have shown that it really worked. It didn't really come out that way. I'm going to get to work. I'm going to get to work on this independent front suspension setup. If somebody out there watching this wants to try it, looks like I'm going to have a setup to send you. So if you want this, you want to try it yourself, maybe you have a gatekeeper and you want spare parts, let me know. Maybe, I don't know, but maybe somebody down below in the comments, maybe I'll just send it to you. So I'm going to get to work putting the solid axle back on. Talk to you later. In the meantime, come over here. See these other videos that we've already produced, and we will see you in the next one. So thank you and goodbye.